Hello out there, and welcome to another episode of the Memphis Manifestos, a Mid-Southerner's Guide to Practical Revolution. I'm your host, Buck, and today we have two candidates here, which is appropriate since early voting just started. We have leMichael Wilson, who's a small business owner and candidate for mayor. Hello, Michael.
Hello.
We also have John Marek, part owner of Dune Valley Farms. Is that correct?
Dune Valley Farms.
Dune
Thanks for having me.
Gotcha. And candidate for Memphis City Council District 5. I had to make them stop talking and turn on the radio, or turn on the recorder. Let's go back to what we were talking about before, which was some libertarians around town. Pick up where you left off. Jordan Wiedner, I know of him, but I don't. Jared. Clearly, I don't know.
Yeah,
him that well.
he's a mutual friend of ours. He used to work at, I think, Run Avenue Coffee down the street from my house, so I'd talk to him all the time. And even though I don't think he and I would ever agree on anything involving economics, well, there's a whole host of issues that we totally agree on. And from cannabis law reform to many other issues that I think we'd both pretty much be in lockstep. And that's the thing is that I think with libertarians, the cool thing about that's developed is that the Democratic Party is pretty much socially libertarian now. That didn't used to be the case when I was active in the mid-2000s, but that's changed. So again, when it comes to economics, we're not going to see eye to eye. I'm not a fan of Atlas Shrugged or any of that stuff, but when it comes to non-economic issues, I think they're a really bright group, and I hope they one day take over the Republican Party.
Yeah, that's my bugaboo when someone names their dog after Ayn Rand. That's when I start looking for an exit. But Michael, how long have you been involved with politics around town? You've moved here from Chicago, correct?
Yes, but I was born here,
Yeah.
and I moved back, and I've been involved in the political scene for about the last 2.5 years. And it just started when I decided to run for mayor, and here we are now, the day before early voting starts. And really, the biggest thing for me is connecting with the marginalized and alienated voters, those who feel like their voice doesn't matter, that they have no direct concerns with what goes on, that nobody's listening to them once they're in office. Those are the individuals that I'm really trying to engage, to be more involved in that voting process, and then the governmental landscape thereafter. So oftentimes we find that people will cast votes if they do that, and then they walk away and they allow candidates to just be out there on their own. Well, the problem with that is, as a candidate, if I'm left alone and I'm around a group of corrupt other politicians, then oftentimes you end up getting swallowed into the corruption. And I think that when we get elected, if we keep that base of individuals around us to keep us strong and focused, that we'll be more efficacious in our role as city servants and not necessarily leaders, but we'll be mindful to always keep citizens first. And that's what my campaign is really about. Not just saying that I'm a politician, but I guess when you get into the act of politics, you have to become a politician, right? So
well, that's a good point, too, in that you have to have people. I've seen a lot of good people go to Nashville or something.
Yeah.
And in order to just work at all, pragmatically, not, from a moral standpoint, having to make little bitty concessions here and one little concession there, and then all of a sudden they're indistinguishable from the rest of the...
Most definitely. So the biggest thing, though, is we have to look at our political process itself. One of the things that I always talk about is right from the beginning, we have to look at how we finance our campaigns. Right now, there are max contributions that individuals can give, whereas I believe there should be a max amount that anybody should spend on an election. That will level out the playing field for everyone, so that you don't have one person raising $1 million and another person only having $10,000, being not being competitive financially. And then what ends up happening is you have individuals now who have no desire to win for public office, but have a desire to run and raise money for those campaigns, and then spend that money when they lose on themselves, things of that nature, that level of corruption. We need to start looking at how we do that. The other thing, though, is just being able to make sure that individuals are running for offices for the right reasons. And when we start, when we stop glorifying the financial means around elections, I think that we'll start getting some generic individuals, some organic individuals who are genuinely in place that are trying to raise the floor for people, and not just in place because if I've never had anything and this is an opportunity for me to run for city council. And city council is a part-time job with a $29,000 salary, specifically referencing the city council for Memphis. So you get $29,000 where you probably weren't even making that much. You're going to get $29,000 and the power and the influence and prestige that goes along with it. So
well, now, they purposely keep these as part-time jobs so that they can have other employment outside of it without having an ethical, which is how you get Berlin Boyd working for FedEx and brokering
exactly
the Gibson Guitar Factory deal.
And still having your own interest in Beale Street and voting on those issues without recusing yourself. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, if I'm making $29,000, which is more than I've normally been making annually, okay, plus the power, the preference, I mean the prestige that goes with it, the influence, the privilege. Now somebody comes and says, I want to build 2 houses on a lot that should have 1 house. Yeah. And here's $5,000. And you give up the vote on just $5,000. Yeah. When individuals who've never had access to resources, financial resources, they'll oftentimes move on that when we don't, as an electorate, rally around them and keep them protected and isolated from those type of interests.
Well, John, how do you see opening it up for? It's definitely made for wealthier people. That's obvious from the people who are already on the.
Is he rich too? I'm gonna give it back to John. But here's the thing, and I always ask people to think about this: why would you spend millions of dollars for a position that only pays a few thousand?
That's a good point. That's a good point. Unless it doesn't just pay a few thousand.
Yeah, leMichael just hit a lot of really good points there. When you look at how our whole system is structured, it's the number one item on my platform. We have a very confusing system. When all of you go to vote this September 13th. I'm about to say 18th. God, I'm so tired right now. September 13th through the 28th, and election day is October 3rd. When you go to vote, you're going to be voting for not one city council person, but 4. And the reason they make that so confusing, there's a whole history behind it I could go into, but the crux of it is that we have super districts and we have single member districts. You have 2 super districts and you have 7 single member districts. Those super districts are huge. They're half the city each, pretty much, and I have a huge problem with them because they favor wealthy people who can afford to run in that large of an area. When you run in a large district, you got to spend a lot more money.
And discourage you from doing any actual representation because it's impossible to cover that much.
Exactly.
Area.
And so one of the biggest parts of my platform is that, and actually this is a big thing too, the people that you elect to city council this year aren't going to just affect the next 4 years. They're going to affect the next 14 years. Because the city council you elect is going to redraw all the districts in 2022 before the 2023 election. And we really need to make sure we elect candidates that support 13 single-member districts or more. I'm open to more.
I know Pearl Walker's talked about the same thing when she was on.
It's really important
having
because
neighborhood representation and people who actually know your face or that you can find.
Exactly.
That are in gated communities that you don't know.
And speaking of people spending ridiculous amounts of money for a $29,000 job a year, my opponent's name is Worth, and
yes. And the only thing he's ever done, I think, is work for George Bush's faith-based initiative.
And he also worked for. I'm pretty sure his dad made a phone call because he was the office manager for billionaire Republican Governor Bill Haslam's campaign, Memphis office for his campaign. And that's all he did before he ran for office. And last time he spent around $300,000 on a city council race, which I believe is the most anybody has ever spent on a city council race.
And this is the family that has, for those who don't know.
Yeah. There's Morgan and Keegan. I always have to point that out because a lot of people think Morgan and Morgan, and I'm like,
I was for a second there. That was probably my head. I was like, that's the wrong name.
No, he's not for the people. He's with Morgan and Keegan, the Memphis version of Wall Street.
Probably been coasting on that for like 10 years.
Yeah, no, I've actually heard that they place their ads around those ads to sow confusion, but that's only a rumor. I haven't been able to confirm that.
Well, I think he's made a lot of success out of doing nothing and saying nothing.
That, and he's also, I mean, I served on the Civilian Law Enforcement Review Board, which is a really big deal to me. Civilian Law Enforcement Review Board is a citizen oversight board for the city of Memphis that is charged with hearing citizen complaints against the police. Now, I'm not anti-police. If I have a problem in my neighborhood, that's who I'm calling, and I support their benefits and making sure they get paid correctly. That being said, the Citizen Oversight Board is sorely needed because currently, or before CLERB came around, the only thing we had was internal affairs, and in my opinion, internal affairs is a conflict of interest in its own conception. So I really support having a strong CLERB, and as counsel, while I served on it for 4 years, fought to give it teeth so much that I didn't get reappointed. Worth Morgan, he was the council liaison to CLERB, and once he didn't get his way on subpoena power, he missed 15 straight meetings. And there's been a lot of constituents complaining about him not returning phone calls. And we've also seen many situations where he took the side of took the side of developers over neighborhood associations.
Oh, yeah, well, that's all yeah.
So, yeah.
It seems like that's who they represent, or developers. Now, on the 29,000 thing, I feel like the guy, when I went to jury duty, I was excited because it was a raise for me. I was the only person there for whom it was a raise. I could do that with, $29,000. That's a good job nowadays. The reason they have such a stranglehold on it is there are pretty good benefits that come with some of these jobs, including state legislature jobs. Curry Todd stayed in that job he could have been dead for like 10 years and nobody would have noticed because he had $300,000 or $30,000 from the police association union. And speaking of which, leMichael, what is your stance on CLERB or the citizen? I just know it as CLERB. I don't know.
Yeah. So I think that the city should have a CLERB board. But I think that the city should not have to have a CLERB board because we should be working with our law enforcement and first responders to ensure that they're not compromising public trust. That's number one. So that we don't have to have these citizen complaints against our first responders. I think that as we look at CLERB, though, we need to make sure that there are some specifics that go into that and making sure that the department is complying with the request of CLERB, and then having a mayor that will embrace the recommendations that CLERB will put forth. I think that we need to clear the whole board out, though, because my recommendation is that all of these appointed individuals, when I become mayor, will be moved off of their boards and allow citizens to make the recommendations of the people who will sit in these capacities to make the decisions for them. So it's not just the CLERB board, but it's all of our boards, whether it's MLGW, a film association, MATA. We need to have more citizen representation, a citizen voice in the governance of the city.
And speaking of which, when we talked about, I'll get your view on this real quick, leMichael, and then yours. Nashville has, 70-something city councilmen? 41. Might as well be 70-something. Gee. But they have a consolidated government, correct? That whole county is just one. And right now we have Mayor Lee Harris, the Shelby County mayor, trying to raise money for MATA, which I've taken the bus for 2 months. It is a nightmare. The public transportation system here is worse than in places I did mission work in Mexico. That's insane. One of my friends told me that it's not for you, it's for FedEx to travel, get people back and forth. It's not for you to go to the grocery store. And I found that to be 100% true. And it just seems to be cut more and more. But it seems like nobody knows. Everyone's able to pass the potato to somebody else. So, although it seems like Lee, to give him credit, he seems like he's trying to do something. Never during election time do you want to say you want to.
There's a lot that you put into
people.
that. So, having lived in Chicago for 30 plus years, I am accustomed to having a government system that is a county as well as a city. We have to look at the type of government that we have in both. Memphis is a strong mayor, weak council. The county is a strong commission, weak mayor. And that will give the dynamics of how governance is done in our area. The other thing, when we compare when I compare Chicago to Memphis, is Chicago has 50 aldermen, where we have our 13. I don't think that it really makes a difference about the number as much as it makes a difference about being connected to the representative who's supposed to provide services for you. We could have 100, and if they still operate if they're operating contrary to the individuals who have elected them, that's still problematic. So even with Chicago, if you pay your taxes to the county then cuts a check back over to the city. These are things that are not, uncustomary throughout different places throughout the country. But I think that our biggest problem is that we have a lot of mismanagement in our local government. And the first thing to be able to change that is to change the leadership. In order for Memphis to be better, we have to have a better mayor. It's real simple. And, it's just very simple. You
ain't going to have by charging people extra money for their cars.
Here's the thing. A lot of folks said, why don't you run for city council? That's because most people don't understand that city council exclusively does development requests and ordinances. When beyond that, everything really reports to the mayor. So if you're talking about making substantial changes in the quality of life and the way we do things in the city of Memphis, go for the position that handles it. The mayor handles police, fire, parks, MLGW, our utilities, the airport, the library.
Yeah, I tell people that if they're getting frustrated with national politics right now, that's just a symptom of a cancer that's local. It's all these assholes who, pardon my language, all these assholes who are corrupt here, they're the ones that elect the party leadership, and then they nominate candidates, and then they become officers, and then next thing you know, you have 2 presidential candidates, and you have to gag to just read the screen.
So very specific.
And so like 70% of what you deal with every day happens locally. You can get involved.
Exactly. Yeah. Very specific, though. If you want to change how police operate in the city, change the mayor. Because the police director reports directly to the mayor. And he will not, that person, the police director will not allow what the mayor does not permit. A couple things. If you remember, a couple years ago, a van was in the impound. Body was in at 7 weeks, and the mayor said nothing. That
or hell, the lady froze to death underneath one of the
outside of City Hall, and he said she wasn't homeless.
And now they're expanding those. They're doing even more of them.
But when the police officers have turned off body cameras, how many officers have been terminated because of that? So that means you're okay with it. We need a mayor that's not going to be friendly with the wrongness that goes on in our city, and be firm about changing the quality of life by changing the corruption that goes on. My last point, then I'll give it over to John. It was maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, the woman that lived next door to former Mayor Warden.
Oh, yeah.
Had her Airbnb. Some people had a party. He came to her house and, kind of intimidated her. And then from there, because he didn't like the response, he called all of these city and county resources.
Don't you know who I am?
Exactly, to come and harass this woman.
Which is a shame. I never thought of him as really a tool.
Okay, so here's with all the people that came, the police came and a TAC team sat on that woman's house for 3 days. That means that Director Rawlings had to have something in that to allow that, but then also that the Mayor Strickland would have allowed that level of tacit understanding, if not intentional understanding, that you can go do this.
Yeah.
When he was just found guilty of illegally surveilling.
And that's what I was about to pivot over to John on. His surveilling people in Memphis, but weirdly, not any white supremacists. Like, I could see maybe some of the people they surveilled, if they had surveilled the people on the other side of the spectrum with equal, vigor. But it doesn't seem like they did any of that. What do you think about the mayor? He always says that I didn't know it was happening. Well, is that a defense?
The blacklist was a huge, huge mistake, and And what's actually Bruce Kramer served with me on the Civilian Law Enforcement Review Board. He's an excellent attorney, probably one of the strongest voices on CLERB. He actually didn't get reappointed to CLERB because he was the attorney involved in the blacklist lawsuit with ACLU. ACLU, by the way, is an amazing group. But if you don't mind, I want to go back to the last question because I had a bunch of points on that. The first point I want to make is I was actually the first person to call for body cams. I called for it before I was on the board, and nobody listened to me and patted me on the head a few times. But when I was on the board, it picked up media. Bill Dries actually wrote the first article and on it, and fortunately, I was able to pressure a bunch of through back channels. I was able to pressure a lot of local elected officials to put body cams on all police. The first response was, "Oh, it's too expensive. That'll never happen." Fortunately, the experience of Rialto, California, and other locations that had implemented body cams, we were able to prove that not only does it protect the officers, not only does it protect the citizens, but it also protects taxpayer dollars and a reduction of lawsuits. So any expense that you put up front is going to get saved tenfold in the long run.
But now we can't get them to turn them on.
That is a huge problem. Actually, when I was a CLERB member, if an officer turned their camera off, I automatically voted against them, and that was probably the only time I ever voted against the majority of the board that I can think
you're
of.
Able to, I guess, privacy.
And all they did was slap them on the wrist. But real quick, to get on the rest of that question, though, I wanted to say with consolidation, I'm a huge supporter of it. It's actually on my platform. I think dual government's wasteful, and a lot of times people ask me, well, how are you going to pay for all the things that you want to do? Because one of the things I do want to do is expand MATA services. Currently, when you look at the map for MATA, it looks like it just goes down one big road and that it doesn't really go too many other places. We have food deserts, as you kind of hinted at earlier in Memphis, where people can't get to the grocery store. And we want to encourage people to work. And if you don't have a vehicle and you can't go from your house to your job, well, clearly that's a problem, and MATA needs to provide those services. So
right now, the staffing companies are giving people Uber cards and then deducting it automatically from their checks.
And I think we need to extend weekend hours. I think for MATA, I think we need
it's
to.
It's weird that they close earlier on a Saturday than they do on a Wednesday.
Makes no sense, and it also to have it open later on weekends discourages drunk driving.
That's what I would think. I would think
bars all
go
over
from
the city,
downtown to midtown or something, and not drive your car.
Yep.
Exactly.
That's a more important reason. Yeah.
Apparently, there's a whole caravan that comes down Germantown Road of Hispanic workers coming from Germantown that have to walk like 5 miles.
Definitely.
Every single night they have to do it.
To wrap up my point on that, I think we need to expand MATA services, and a lot of people say, well, how are you going to pay for that and other things that I propose? Well, consolidation would save a ton of money. Yeah. It's dual bureaucracy, dual government, and we could have something closer to that Nashville metro government if we did consolidate.
We're going to take a quick break and then come back and talk about pilot programs, because that's another way we can talk about saving money. The media seems to like what they call a debate is, to me, a press conference, if that.
We do no debates. Everything is a forum. It's just platform talking. There's not one candidate that's not going to say that we don't deserve to have better transportation, better schools, better infrastructure, better. Everybody wants to do better. But there's no one really specifically saying what better is. Like I have in my narrative that, when we talk about public transportation, we need shorter routes. Yeah. If you look over by the library, Central Library, right? There was this big thing with City Council about how they needed to put a red light there and some type of traffic thing. So they developed this walkway for pedestrians to get from one side once the bus drive. How about the bus just turn at Tillman, go over to Walnut Grove, drive into the parking lot for the library, and drop people off and pick them up right at the front door? I mean, a really simple fix. Yeah. And instead of a bus going from all the way downtown to Germantown Parkway, how about there's a turnaround somewhere? Like, come to the library, go back. It would increase the frequency. Yeah. And then, as we shared, having buses being available for people that work third shift. But I think that when we have those specifics, that would give a voter an opportunity to say, hey, I like what John is talking about. I like what this person is talking about. That's who I want to represent me, and not just somebody that's saying we need better mobility around the city.
That's one thing I criticize about a lot of candidates. You look at the commercials right now. I haven't seen a single commercial yet where I actually see a policy proposal. It's always well, my opponent. It's better, safer neighbor or better, safer Memphis. It's like, what is that? What does that even mean? Like, what are you going to do? And then I go to a lot of people's websites and you don't even see a platform. It drives me nuts.
So John makes a really good point about that. A lot of times when we talk about safer communities, everybody's thinking that has to do with law enforcement. But I mean, imagine if we just lit the city up brighter at night. You know, it's dark in the city, and if we change the light levels and make the city brighter, it might reduce crime and safer. That's one aspect, but safer could also just be that I don't have accidents and things of that nature because I can see better and different markings or you know, I remember as a child they used to have the address numbers on the curb. We don't have that anymore. So you have people getting lost and things of that nature. Those are things that we need to have conversations around when we say, you know, creating these safer communities, but nobody's talking about it, like John said.
I was a delivery driver for Cammy's for a while, and I can attest to that. Cammy's.
Oh, I thought you said for
No, Cammy's. It's a restaurant.
I was about to get you. You a delivery driver for Tammy?
No, Cammy's. I was just saying the address thing matters, especially at night.
Is Cammy still in business?
You know, I wish I knew. They were local.
That was a little plug you gave.
Yeah, I'll hit them up for advertising bucks here soon. Well, I mean, that brings a bigger point. They always throw cops at something. And it seems like Mayor Strickland especially, and now they've hired, 500 new, or they're hiring 500 new police officers with money that's directly given from corporations. And it seemed to have happened almost immediately after they started shutting down the roadway to, like, FedEx and stuff like that.
It's a joke.
It's a joke? How's it a joke?
So first of all, you have to look at the economics, and John can tell you this even with like the body cameras, and you know whatever they'll do grant requests and things and get the money, but then not incorporate the technology into doing things better. The situation with our staffing of police officers, though, is we have so many that are leaving that we're really not balancing out. That we're increasing the numbers. We're just maintaining. We have individuals that are leaving and individuals that are retiring. So they're just trying to maintain a force. Then, you know, we have to look at the fact that the qualifications have been reduced. So just about anybody can get on a force, and that compromises the strength of the unit. But okay, go ahead.
Sure. We were talking earlier about Clurb and how we were also talking about Mayor Wharton and how he recently got in trouble for exerting some influence over a neighbor who had an Airbnb and so forth. What kind of influence can a corporation put on the police department when they are directly responsible for funding of that police department? John?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think money brings power in a lot of ways. But I mean, and as far as campaign contributions go and things like that, corporations, you know, there's a 1,600 individual limit. So if a business could only contribute as much as an individual, that would be where that would stop. However, PAC contributions are 5,000 caps, and if you do a super PAC, which means you don't actually have to disclose. I mean, it means you don't have a limit, and the limitation on super PAC is so bogus too. It's that you cannot directly communicate with a campaign. But there in Colorado, when I ran some state senate races out there, I learned quickly that there were ways around that, and I saw that the other side of one of my races, the way they would use the super PAC is they would have them do a poll, because polls are expensive, 20, 30,000. And then they would post it on a public website that nobody else would know the address to online, and then the campaign that's not supposed to communicate with them could go on that website and pull the information off of it. So, yeah, that's the kind of thing that super PACs do, and we've had, and I'll say too, I don't mean to get off, I didn't address the topic as directly as I meant to there, but I will say that what really drives me nuts is that we live in a 65% African-American city, a 75% progressive city, yet we have conservative, wealthy interests running our city, and we have for a long time. And it hasn't really mattered who's been in control. It's just been a continuation of one after another, and it really shocks me that we haven't really woken up and fought against that sooner. I'm making it a part of my campaign. A lot of people in politics, and it drives me nuts, well, they like to play patty cake. They're nice with everybody. And while it's okay to be strategic to a certain extent, you really got to be willing to speak out, even when it's somebody you're friends with. Like, I don't, there's plenty of people I like, but if I disagree with them on a policy, it's not personal, but I'm going to speak up.
And on the flip side, I don't have to like somebody to work with them
Yeah,
necessarily.
definitely.
But yeah, it seems like civility is a replacement for competence.
Exactly.
Because I hear this all the time. Oh, Jim's a great guy. Well, I go to church with him. Well, okay. And what qualification is that for government at all? In fact, 90% of the time, it seems like it's compensating for something else. So how do you get around that? Because immediately, 90% of the time, I find that pearl clutching is just a way to distract from the fact that I don't know what I'm, talking about, or somebody doesn't know what they're talking about. 90% of the time. And it seems like they do that a lot here, even over cartoons. I promised I wasn't going to talk anymore about it, but that's it.
Well, I know I don't fit the traditional mold of what a mayor would look like in this city. In fact, early on, a lot of folks said I didn't have the look of a mayor. And I was like, well, I don't know what that is, but I would also like for you to give consideration that your quality of life has not changed for you by continually voting for individuals that fit this mold. That, they have to be lawyers, or they have to be this, or they have to go to this school, or, connect with this group of people. And it's not changing, as John references, the life for, while we are 65%, African American, look at the poverty rate. That's covering beyond ethnicity. That poverty rate is, across the city. Memphis has the second highest poverty rate in the country, and it's number one for payday loans in the entire country.
Yeah, 1 out of 4 Memphians lives in poverty. 25%.
And you don't hear any candidate, incumbent, saying that they have done anything intentionally to reduce the poverty levels in the city, or to reduce the factors that attribute poverty.
They make money off of poverty here.
Exactly. And that goes back to when you talk about the corporate interest having that influence. There was ordinance presented to the city council for parades, marathons, and public gatherings and things, because Fred Smith's grandson couldn't get out his driveway when one of the marathons was coming by. So they, put a full ordinance together. So, we have to get away from that, though.
I like that you brought up the ranked choice voting, too, because that was one of the main factors that put me in this race, because I was so infuriated that not only did they not implement it after it was voted on twice. I'm the only plaintiff withstanding in the lawsuit, fighting the state on that right now. And I volunteered for it both in 2008 and 2018, at a higher level in 2018. But it really drives me nuts that not only have they prevented implementation, but they wasted $40,000 of taxpayer
it was
money.
more than that.
It is more now, and I'll explain that. It's $40,000 is what they spent on the false and misleading and failed campaign against ranked choice voting. But they also are continuing to spend money because they're fighting us on the lawsuit. So, and it really disgusts me that something that just makes so much sense, because if you look at it, the fiscal note in 2008 said that it saved $1 million every 4 years. In reality, it's probably somewhere between $750,000 and $1 million every 4 years. The reason we can't peg it exactly is because it depends on how many runoffs you have.
If it costs money, it would still be worth, in my opinion.
It gives you a more representative body.
More people involved in it.
Exactly.
So how do you make what happens when, because of the new voter registration law, which just took place, and it did take place for this election, correct? The one where they can penalize voter registration groups for having over 500?
I believe there's an ongoing lawsuit over it, and I know that there was a judge who recently slammed the program against that. I'd have to read I'd have to see if they've actually come to a final decision, or if that was just something spoken during a hearing. But I'm an attorney, by the way. But that is That's why I can talk about lawsuits, but have to throw that in there when I can. I had I'm getting sidetracked now, but somebody actually told me in 2015 I shouldn't have run on being an attorney last time because attorneys are so unpopular. But I think I've actually used my law license in a way that's been good for the community, and I did some years of criminal defense work, but other than that, yeah.
I mean, as long as you don't do like Brian Kelsey.
I debated him on national Fox News in 2006. Yeah, Shepard Smith.
So I don't have a law degree, but I welcome John to be on city council when I'm mayor so that if I have some concerns, I know that I can trust John's judgment.
Well, and unlike our city council's attorney who acts as a 14th member sometimes, and I will actually tell leMichael that my legal opinion is an opinion. It's not law. And unfortunately, I think that's been the disadvantage of not having an attorney on the city council is that every time Alan Wade makes a legal opinion, the whole council acts as though he just spoke the truth or something, and it's like, no, it's just an opinion.
So I'll actually say that I would move into the district of anyone who was running that said that the first thing that they would do is put forth a resolution to fire Alan Wade. Any city council person that's running that said that they would replace him.
Is he attached to CASA?
Okay, no, you're right. CASA Strategies is the company that our political.
You wouldn't mind just breaking that down for people, because even I'm just learning that. I was a reporter for several years, but we'd never dealt with city politics. It was always county and then up to state. I had never heard of this group. It is the Wolfram and Hart of Memphis.
Yep, it's a right wing public strategies, really political consulting group is what they are, and they're consultants. And what they do is they convince candidates to run for office that have a lot of money and make as much as they can off of them. And when you look at who they work for, I mean, they bled George Flynn for so much money, it's ridiculous. But that being said, they're when you look.
So bad for him, man. Can we give him something?
I mean, in my opinion, if I see CASA Strategies working for somebody, I know that that's who I need to vote against, because they always push the candidates that push the wealthiest 1% special interest agenda. They're actually they're working in coordination with three candidates, and I know it's probably more. Look, I'll tell you from as somebody who's been involved in campaigns and politics since 2004, and I was actually interested in it before then. It's in my best interest to stay in my own lane and not get into other lanes. And I say that with peace and love. That being said, sometimes it's better to do what's right than it is to do what's politically strategic. So I've been very open about the fact that I support Erica Sugarman for Super District 9-1, and very open about the fact that I support Dr. Jeff Warren for Super District 9-3, and it's because they're running against the same person I'm running against. They're running against wealthy heirs. And I say heirs because I don't know if any of them independently have ever. You know, I guess Chase probably has through his family's business, but they're all the same people. They're the wealthy 1%. And you know, it's funny. It would be the wealthy business person themselves that would run for office, but now it seems to be the pattern that they're running their children for office. And I have a big problem with that. And when you look at who CASA supports, I mean, they're for Berlin Boyd. And it's not a party thing. That's the thing. A lot of people think, because that person's, that's an African-American councilman, therefore that must be a progressive councilman.
And the first instant that somebody in city politics starts talking about Republicans or Democrats is the instant I stop them and I'm like, you're hearing a narrative, or you're eating a narrative, because that is not at all. The first step is realizing that's bullshit. It is about corrupt and not corrupt.
Yep. No, I agree with that, but I will point out that even though that's very true, in 2015, I ran my campaign thinking that it's a nonpartisan race. I'm going to stress my qualifications, and I'm going to reach out to everyone, and everybody's going to see I'm much more qualified than, especially Worth Morgan, who never really did anything before running for office, didn't bother to finish college. But look, let me point out too, you don't have to have a college degree to run for office, but have deep community involvement at least, and he has neither. And my point is, though, I ran my nonpartisan race. I tried to reach out to everybody. At the end of the day, when I looked at the vote, who voted for who, Republicans voted for Republicans, Democrats voted for Democrats. I wish it weren't that way, but in my experience, it has been, and that's why I'm very openly running as a Democrat, and it's why. But to last point, I'll shut up. But to sum it up, though, I do agree with you. Though it's, I mean, I've heard Berlin Boyd speak at a Young Democrats meeting at Lee Harris's house downtown a long time ago, and so I'm aware that there are people who call themselves Democrats. There are people who call themselves progressives, but at the end of the day, when they vote, they're voting the same way as the wealthy 1%. And when you look at their host committees, Berlin Boyd's host committees look the same as Kemp Conrad's host committee. That's a problem. People need to pay attention to that.
Yeah. Well, how do you also have to battle with, because you were talking about how you're very socially liberal, or socially progressive, but fiscally conservative?
No, I'm
Or
not.
the other way around?
I'm not fiscally conservative
the
at
other
all.
way?
I'm economically about as liberal as you get in the Democratic Party. I'm an Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders supporter.
Right on.
But and socially I'm very liberal. I was pointing out that my libertarian buddies and me have very similar
And I find I have the
social.
exact same thing. My progressive tendencies happen to be libertarian sometimes, and it seems like sometimes you get tagged with the litmus test. Oh, you're not liberal enough or progressive enough, and it's like, well, why can't we fix stuff that we already agree on? Michael, how do you break that dynamic and get people to realize that, well, to do what they've never done before and vote in their best interest instead of party?
Oh, now you want to toss it to me. Give me the hard one. I think that one of the biggest things that we need to do is focus on civics and doing it at a young age, where individuals are more connected to the political processes, to understand how the government landscape is in Memphis, to understand how important it is for them to be aware of the things that affect them in their communities where they live. A lot of people say that they're renters, so they don't matter. But I don't know any landlord, property owner that pays their own taxes. Those taxes are rolled into the rent, so that means that the renter should have a say in how that money is spent around where they're living. I went to Booth Park, and it had no swings, no seesaw, no benches, no nothing. It's just a park named after the first African American lawyer here in the city. The children have nailed a milk crate to the tree for a basketball hoop. So there's no conversation around that. But then there's a conversation of spending $70 million into a park downtown for tourism, for the most part, right? And I think that we need to just get people more educated and more engaged around their involvement into how the city is run. I mean, for example, the charter does not say that the mayor has to come to city council, but I'll go to every city council meeting because that's an opportunity to connect with the voters. With the way technology is, why do we not have a Facebook Live at least once a week with the mayor? Why does the mayor not have a town hall in every part of the city once a month to be able to connect with voters citizens, I should say, because I don't want to just limit it to voters, because there are some individuals who are not able to participate in the voting process, but they're still citizens. And the mayor should be accessible to hear their concerns in North Memphis, East Memphis, and South Memphis, and not just listening to the big developers and the influencers or the Keisha or the Memphis Tomorrow individuals, and the Turleys and the Lobes and Henry Hyde and all of these people that control Memphis. That most people, you have candidates who have never heard of Memphis Tomorrow, and that membership is $50,000 to get inside, into this organization. And these are the people who make the decisions for the city. We need to talk about those kind of things and expose it.
I think one thing that he hit on that I think I have a feeling me and you are going to agree on this. They're trying to get a landlord registry started. And I think that's very important because, and again, I'm going to put my attorney cap on, but the reason I want to go into this so much is because currently, if code enforcement finds out that a landlord is not keeping the water running, keeping the utilities on, keeping other things like other basic necessities, like making sure ceilings aren't falling apart, if they have to go after them in environmental court, and so in order to get them into court, they have to serve them subpoena papers or make them appear, but And anyways, and they have to serve them. And when they do that, a lot of times these landlords will put their name for their company instead of under their personal name and their personal contact information. They'll give some vague LLC, no contact information, and it's really hard to get them into the courtroom when they're trying to make them treat their tenant like a human being. And so what the landlord registry would do, they've had it in Nashville for 11 years now. What the landlord registry would do is it would require landlords to fill out an application, put their name and a contact person on the application. And so therefore, when it's actually time to go to environmental court, they'll actually have to show up and they'll actually have to fix the property. People shouldn't be living in terrible conditions. And unfortunately, the wealthiest 1% know that that renters usually, I'm a renter, I've been a renter my whole life. Wish I could own a house. I got $275,000 in student loan debt. But but renters they know are the people that aren't going to, in many cases, know their legal rights to fight the landlord, and they're not the people that have the money to influence government to do anything about it. So I'm very happy to see environmental court judge Patrick Dandridge and I don't want to say his name wrong. It's Knecht. I think it's Knecht. But the Public Works Administrator,
Robert
Knecht, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
They're working on I read a lot of things and can't pronounce them. I said what was it? Oh, I can't even remember the word in my master's course a long time ago. It's so embarrassing. I think I said regime instead of regime because I don't come from a wealthy background. I'm a working class kid and I read the word but never heard anybody say it. Yeah. Yeah, pretty bad. But anyways, you can see my point. I think that we need to stand up for the disadvantaged in our city, and I think that a landlord registry would address exactly what leMichael was talking about there.
And that is a part of my platform as well. I think that the biggest thing for me is when we do have a registry is that it would give tenants an opportunity to see the background on potential landlords. Oftentimes, landlords, they do exhaustive searches in your background to see if you'll be an ideal tenant. But let's look to see if you'll be an ideal landlord.
Exactly.
And I think that then what will happen is, because everything is economics. When you start hitting a person in their economics, in their money, in their pocket, they'll start to do better. But right now, there's no accountability and no enforcement for them to do better.
I have a couple of friends who rented or were around the crosstown area and found that one week they'd come home and see that they were evicted. Not because of lack of payment, but because the house had been sold after they'd fixed it up. You know, they rented it out and said, hey, you pay weekly, so at the end of the week, you gotta be gone. He was like, I've been living here for 2 years. It never occurred to me that I wouldn't be here next week. And then he came back and told him that he was saving him money by making the house more energy efficient. What he didn't say was that that's a requirement. It's like the law here. You have to. I get fed up with that. People acting like it's their charity, and it's like, no, you would have never done that if it had not been legally required of you to begin with.
Part of the, I'll be quick on this one. Part of the proposed ordinance that's being worked on is that they would actually require landlords to give tenants a bill of rights to show them what they have a right to.
Over 70% of our housing stock is not energy efficient. And when we talk about it, see, all of this works in a cycle. When we talk about the poverty, you may be spending, $300-$400 a month in a utility bill. When if the house was energy efficient, that could be reduced by $150-$200 because you don't have your air blowing out the window and heat blowing out the cracks in the walls.
Well, in Midtown, I can tell the temperature by holding my hand up to the power outlet.
Yeah. Just blowing through, right? Yeah.
What it is.
Yeah, and there's so much that we can be doing to change the quality of life for people in the city, but we're not. We need to be investing into the infrastructure of our utilities so that when a forecast comes that the wind is going to blow too hard, that power is not going out. But then also we need to make sure that we're being fiduciarily responsible because we gave a $10 million contract to ABC Tree Trimming to trim the trees off the power lines, and they're based out of Texas and hired absolutely nobody from Memphis, and all of the workers came from South America. And, we have to stop putting people in places that intentionally compromise the way we live in this city.
No, that's something that unions are up in arms about, and it's one of the reasons that I'm very pro-labor and rabidly pro-labor. But I'm putting and that's why I mean I don't mean to say the term fiscal conservative, like I want to make sure we manage the budget and save money. I mentioned some of that earlier. I think getting away from TVA would be another way to save a bunch of money.
That's what I was going to bring it back to was when we talk about paying for this stuff, how much we invest in corporations in this city. And how little we invest in people.
Yep, and with
nothing.
With the pilots, my big problem with pilots is that the whole point of a pilot is to bring a new business into town.
Explain for people who don't know what it is.
Payment in lieu of taxes.
Yep, payment in lieu of taxes, and it's basically an opportunity for them to get a big tax break. But which again, if it's a new company that's coming to Memphis for the first time, I actually don't have much of a problem with that. When I have a problem with it is when we're giving them to businesses that have been in Memphis for a very long time. It's like, why are we giving? I mean, the whole point's to bring them in. Once they're here, shouldn't they be part of the community, enjoy being part of the community, and not need corporate welfare anymore in order to exist? But what I was getting to at the other point, I can't remember what I was talking about now. It was the I'm gonna shut up now.
You're cool. You're cool because you did a perfect segue. When we talk about our pilot program, it needs to be overhauled. So the first thing that I do is go in and put a freeze on it. Let's assess where we are with the existing pilots right now. Because one of the things that we have to look at, which Electrolux kind of showed us, is that we have these pilots that nobody's living up to the terms of, or many companies are not living up to the terms of them. And then when those contracts, those agreements are expiring, they go into what is referred to as a retention pilot, that they're going to strong arm us to get even more concessions in order to stay. So that's number one. But I think that the way a pilot should really work for us is that we would be very intentional about creating a market and then having corporations see, okay, they're producing these individuals. They're producing this workforce. I want to have a regional office in Memphis. Let them knock on our door to come, as opposed to us always knocking on somebody else's door saying, hey, come over here. We have an empty warehouse. You can, set up over here. We're bringing in all this distribution. So then what we're doing is, because if you make an individual marketable, they will leave. My son just graduated from William Penn University, a private school in Oskaloosa, and he came back to Memphis, and his first job was working in at FedEx. And there's nothing wrong with working at FedEx, but
Not the Army. It doesn't have to be your only option.
Your only option. So you have a bachelor's degree in kinesiology. Yeah. You come to Memphis and you have to work a labor job, part-time hours, minimum amounts of money. That's problematic. That's why we see so many individuals graduating from Rhodes, University of Memphis, Lamar on, and they're out of here. But then the flip side is we have this conversation of individuals graduating from the Shelby County schools who have to take remedial classes when they get to, college. So the only option for them is to go into that workforce. So we're preparing them in school to go into distribution and warehouse centers. And that's problematic.
This is my OCD kicking in, but the only thing I was going to mention earlier I was getting to is the tree situation. I support a local preference. If we have two different companies putting in a bid for a city contract, and one is local and one is not, and the bids are at least somewhat close to each other, we need to go with the local company. It's a much better expenditure of city resources when we put our money back into companies in Memphis, not companies that are in Texas.
Because that's even how they've done the FedEx Forum, is they use a non-union labor that's from a company in Georgia, if I'm correct. They bring labor from Georgia that drives all the way up here, and then takes their check and goes all the way back. Yeah. And it's
we could get double bang for our buck by reinvesting in our own people.
All of our money just goes straight out of the city, either to Tunica, either to Arkansas, or somewhere else but here. So how do you? Trying to think of how to put the question.
You change the mayor.
I was trying to think. Yeah, I mean that's one way to do it.
That's it. It's the only way to do it.
And to hit on what I think you're getting at, and this is something all my people. I lived in Southeast Memphis, but they hadn't built a school to get my school or my neighborhood out of Germantown yet. But they did that later. Southland. I went to Southland Middle School, so now I would go to Southland High School where I grew up. But because of the situation, I went to Germantown. So my people that are listening in Germantown and the surrounding communities, don't take offense to this. It's not meant to be offensive, but I think it is a very important point to make. I watched white flight occur my whole childhood.
Same here. I was in Collierville.
Yeah, a lot of people that left my part of town are moving out to you.
Yep.
But
it's a bubble, and you don't realize I lived in it my whole life, and I was pretty progressive even in high school and stuff. But I didn't have an idea of what progressive really was until I was in Memphis and making an effort for it.
Yeah. But what I'm getting to, hopefully I can get to my point quickly. Lack of brevity is my weakness, and I can't do Twitter because I can't keep it under 40 characters. But my point is that people that live in the surrounding communities that left the city or have grown up outside the city their whole lives, they don't usually work in Germantown. They don't usually, sometimes, but they don't usually work in Olive Branch. They work in Memphis. They use our streets. They use our other city services. They enjoy the beautiful view of the river, and then after when everything's said and done, they drive home. They don't pay for it, and then a good chunk of them get on social media and talk about how bad Memphis is. I'm trying to come up with ideas on how we can collect revenue to in order to fund more city services based on the fact that so many people use them and don't pay for them. The only really good idea I've come up with so far on it, and I'm open to any other suggestions, is a tax on parking garages downtown. And I say tax, no, that's a negative word to a lot of people, but you have to realize, I mean, libraries, roads, schools, other things, they cost money, and we need them. And so, and right now, our hands are really tied on, I said I was going to be brief, sorry. Our hands are really tied on revenue, and I'm sure leMichael can talk to this, because property taxes and sales taxes are about the only two forms of taxation we have outside of a few exceptions.
And I was going to pivot this to leMichael, excuse me. A lot of people don't understand the payment in lieu of taxes. It's if the tax value of your property or business goes up, you don't pay the increase, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
No.
Or is it you just don't pay the property taxes, period?
It's an abatement, I believe.
An abatement? Okay. And then we have no real reporting mechanism to ensure that they do that, correct?
No reporting mechanism of integrity.
I feel like it's a way politicians have used to obscure the fact that they're taking money out of the fund, because your general funds, because it's coming out of it next year and the year after and the year after that, right? Not general fund, but I mean, it's a revenue source for the city to be paying for this stuff, and now it's all gone.
There has to be a balance that if you're getting these concessions, tax concessions, that there has to be something on the other end that you're giving. So if we're giving you $23 million over a 10-year period, what are you investing into the community? Are you going to put together a technology resource center for a school? Are you creating a learning environment for adults, because we have adult literacy problems in our city? So what are you doing to supplement or to complement what you're getting in those concessions? That's basically what needs to be done to that extent.
Didn't Sharp do that, though, with solar power? And then ended up not making any solar power for any of us?
So that goes to accountability and leadership. But, those are part...
What's that?
what we don't have. So that's why we need individuals in office who are fresh and dynamic, visionaries who can make some change, that are embracing some new ideas, that are a fresh voice for the city of Memphis, that we can push back on these individuals who are running the city based upon legacy. Individuals who are all about their name and their history of their names and things of that nature. We need to get people in office, because that's the biggest pushback that we got when we were doing our I gotta stay ranked choice voting, but we were calling it IRV last year, instant runoff voting. But the biggest pushback that we got was from Ed Ford, who is the Ford name is a political dynasty in the city of Memphis. And, that it was a lot of fear mongering, because individuals did not understand the mechanics of ranked choice voting and how it could be beneficial. And at the end of the day, I thought it was disingenuous for any of our sitting politicians, elected officials, to not try to exhaust a means of encouraging more voter participation.
And I'm sorry. At the end of the day, too, what it really came with Ed being one of the people that, or Councilman Ford being one of the people that opposed it so heavily, what we noticed was that incumbents in general were afraid of it. And the reason they're so afraid of it is because when people get when people get mad at the city council person, a lot of people jump into the race to run against them. Look at Berlin Boyd's race right now. Look how many people there. That's exactly
what's happening. Berlin Boyd has so many people in the race that because he won't get 50% plus one, it'll go into a runoff. So look, you got the group like Keisha, they're putting money up, but they're putting money up for the runoff, not necessarily for the primary election.
Exactly. He hit the nail on the head there. What it really comes down to is that you split the vote so that it forces a runoff, because if you had a majority, if it's a 1-versus-1 race, Berlin would lose, period, and he knows that.
Exactly.
But if it goes to a runoff, that's why we have to get rid of these runoffs. The runoffs are extremely low turnout. I want to say it's like 5% or less of the population of the district that turns out in these things. Yeah. And guess who has the advantage in every runoff? The person with the most money and the incumbent in many cases.
Yeah, the incumbent, because what happens is candidates are exhausting their funds for the regular election.
How many jobs does Ford have now?
I don't even know.
Well, I mean, we know that he's still collecting a check from the city to do some financial literacy or whatever with the library. That's a contract. And
it's hilarious on so many levels.
You're doing something. And here's my thing. I don't knock anyone as a person, because I'm president of the Rotary Club of Whitehaven. Ed is a member of the Rotary Club.
Go Rotary.
So, right, exactly. So I don't knock people as for who they are.
Yeah.
But I have problems when they've been elected for, a specific representation, and they're anti that. That's like some questions have been asked of me along the way in the last 2.5 years that have absolutely nothing to do with the mayor. And I think that my personal, position on some things does not even make a difference in the mayor's office. It has no bearing. Let's be very specific and intentional about the conversations that we have with elected officials, because then we can hold them accountable to being able to represent us. And that goes back to you asking that question or the inquiry around how do we as citizens be more mindful or more conscious of what these elected officials are supposed to be doing. And that means that we need to know what the city charter parameters are. Know what these people's responsibilities are, because a lot of folk go to city council with if you go to city council during the public comments, most times the city councilors are walking around doing other things. They're texting, being very dismissive and things of that nature. But a lot of the concerns that citizens are bringing forth don't even affect city council. They have no policy changing decisions on the stuff that these people are talking about. But at the end of the day, I think most people in the city of Memphis just want to be heard. They just want to hear share something. You're supposed to be able to talk to your district rep and have the district rep be able to give you direction on where to go. And if they can't do it, then the district rep will intercede and start bringing some levels of recourse and things of that. But we don't have that. And that's problematic. And that's why my biggest thing with the campaign has just been trying to share the processes with individuals and make them more informed with how our city government works and who really controls our government, so that they can start holding folk accountable to doing some change in the city.
I want to give some credit where it's due. leMichael was very vocal and active with the ranked choice voting campaign, and I'll tell you, man, I think it says a lot of good things about him, because it could have been strategically better to stay out of it, because when you get involved with ranked choice voting, you make all the incumbents and all the people that are in power angry because they don't want it, because it threatens their offices in a lot of ways. Even though in some ways it really doesn't. As long as you're doing a good job representing your constituents, it shouldn't matter. That being said,
Michael won't say that. I will totally call out shitty people. But I have no problem. There are certain standards that make you a shitty person or not. You can be a butthole. That doesn't matter. You can be an asshole. That's fine. But there's certain, when you're an elected official and you don't care about getting elected anymore, or you're circumventing getting elected, trying to make it a done deal. And it seems like money around here has become like corporations are just like an aristocracy without God.
Yeah.
They just pass it from father to son, father to son. It's property being passed, it's position being passed, it's influence and peddling and companies being passed down. And I'll have friends in Collierville who say, it's un-American. I ought to be able to leave my kid everything. And I'm like, no, that is un-American. That is why America was started, was so that way you couldn't do that.
Former President Jimmy Carter, I can't remember the exact term he used, but I want to say he referred to the U.S. as I think it's the term for multi-person oligarchy, pretty much. But I don't know if it's oligopoly or what it would be categorized as. But he recently, I think it was in the last couple of years, said something along those lines. And to hear it from a former sitting U.S. president, or former U.S. president, I should say, was really eye-opening. Plus, there was some studies that came out from, oh man, people can come at me if I quote wrong, but I want to say it was Princeton. I can't remember, but some big university basically put out a study saying the same thing. We've really unfortunately lost. If you look at the 1970s, I'm getting into some weird stuff here, so I'm going to keep it short if I can. But if you look at the 1970s, inflation and wage. Inflation, and when you looked at wages and you compared it to inflation and what the average worker made, the average worker was much better taken care of. Now, I say the average worker because we still had terrible issues with race and lots of situations that still exist, and terrible conditions for the LGBTQ community and other things like that existed. So don't let me.
You're not saying make America great.
Yeah, exactly. I want to make sure I make that clear. But as far as just the average wage went and how the average worker was treated, it was very different than what's happened now. And unfortunately, I think we saw it start in the 80s, and it's really come to fruition now, where the wealthiest 1%, the special interests in our country, have taken over from local government to national government. And I think it's really depressing to say, but from local government to national government, we have a problem with unqualified inherited wealth running for office, sitting in those seats for some type of twisted participation trophy filled with false relevance. And it drives me nuts to see it happening. And it's actually, again, in 2015, I saw a picture of Worth Morgan, and I have a soft spot for Philip Spinoza. He actually listened to us on Club, and he actually voted for decrim, not against decrim of cannabis like Worth Morgan voted. But before I knew Philip Spinoza, I saw the picture of him and Worth Morgan shaking hands with Fred Smith. I'm pretty sure is who it was in the paper, and I realized that's who they were grooming for city council. And I was like, I've never seen Worth at anything before. I've never heard of him. I've been involved in politics, my whole adult life.
It's being crowned.
Basically, for not doing anything. And that's why, Mary Wilder was a really good candidate in 2015, and she supports me this time, and I probably should have stayed out of the race, but so that I don't think I split the vote. When you look at the total votes, there was 8,000 progressive votes to 11,000 conservative votes because of the turnout.
There's a point at which it's not somebody's vote either. It's if you can do a better job appealing to them or communicating with them. I feel like a lot of politicians are like, well, they didn't get what I was saying. It's like, no. Oh. You've got to do half that work.
Yeah, I was just really angry. To sum it up, and I could have said it in one sentence. I don't think you should run for office if you've never done anything before.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, that's weird. That's a very radical idea.
What is done something before? Because everyone's interpretation of that is subjective.
Yeah.
Even like the charter said that you had to be of moral character. What is that?
Yeah, that's funny. It's a weird legal term. They tried to get me to add something along the lines of that to our operating agreement for my business, and I was like, I could see that being abused and used in all kinds of weird ways, so I didn't include it.
I'm comfortable using that phrase again about myself.
So that's what I think that there has to be, and I really understand exactly what you're saying, that there has to be some type of some residue to show that you've been organic.
Well, and I think Rotary Club's a perfect example of doing something in the community. I'm a member of the downtown Memphis Rotary Club. We meet at the Bluff right now because Claiborne Temple's being worked on. But the issues that
he tried to plug another club. I was in that club until they threw me out.
I didn't know that
when I became president.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I became president when I joined, and you can't be a member of two clubs.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah,
all the Midtown Rotary people are like, why aren't you in our group? You're more like us. And I was like, man, I love everybody. I just like y'all.
That Midtown group is fun though.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've been to that their meetings. It's a really good group to be involved in. They get involved in a lot of charitable causes and good things. I mean, like when I saw it was an eye-opening experience for me because I'll admit as a kid that grew up in Southeast Memphis, which again, when I say Southeast Memphis, I want to make it clear I did not grow up. I'm not 8 Mile.
Yeah.
I didn't. I didn't grow up in the worst part of town at all. My neighborhood was good, but I also didn't
Representing.
But I didn't grow up. I didn't grow up in the wealthiest part of town either, and I think it really shaped. And I grew up in an African American neighborhood, and I think that really shaped a lot of who I am and how I look at things. When I was a young white male driving through my neighborhood, getting pulled over all the time because they wanted to know why I was in my own neighborhood, kind of shapes your perspective on
I'm buying
things.
weed. What are you doing here?
That's what they thought, I'm sure. I was just going home after working a terrible long shift at Joe's Crab Shack as a busboy, but
Good old Joe's Crab Shack.
I don't think they even exist here
Joe's
anymore.
Crab
so that's
Shack.
okay.
Joe's Crab Shack.
It was a terrible place to be a busboy, but my point.
If you're allergic to shellfish.
Yeah, good. I'm so glad that place is gone.
I never want to do the little dances we had to do all the time.
No, the building's there. I just drove past it. It's not there anymore.
What are you talking about?
The one over that was at Winchester and
The Riverdale.
Riverdale, is that it?
No, out here in Wolf Chase.
I thought it was a red. That's Bahama.
No, I'm telling you, it's Joe's Crab Shack.
I don't even know.
They have to legally change their name like every couple of months to avoid the poisoning lawsuits from Dr. Corey B. Trotz. Which this brings us to our final wrap-up question. This is my big deal is I'm a huge sci-fi fan. And I feel like sci-fi has a utility to it because it's not just fantasy, it's envisioning something. And a lot of times art imitates life imitates art. Where do you picture Memphis by 2050? What do you see as being different about this city? Where do you see the city? We'll start from there. I'll start with leMichael.
Do you have to put more to it? Is that with the current type of leadership that we have or with an ideal leadership?
I will leave you to make the prediction. Because like in my vision of it, it's half dystopian hellscape, half utopian like bubble city, like Gallifrey.
I feel like we've been the tale of two cities for my whole life, and that's always been something that bothered me. I mean, I watched the Hickory Ridge Mall crumble while I watched other places get tons of investment. I think too often we have the haves and the have-nots in our city, and I actually, sadly, it depends on, and I think leMichael's going to agree with me on this one 100%. I think it depends on who we put in leadership. I think it depends on other factors too, like nationwide economy and economic conditions, technology. If we remain the hegemonic power in the world that we are now, or at least are to a certain extent, not as much as we used to be. But I think a lot of those factors are going to tie into it. It's not a bad call. But yeah, I mean, it really does depend on where we go, and I think that issues that you brought up today on the show, like how we treat MATA, how much we connect our city to each other. As long as we keep two separate cities going, it's going to be two different answers to that question. If we can actually connect the city and look at the city as a whole and not as just one part of town or another, then I've got hope for the future.
One part of town's going to love that idea. The other part's going to hate it. Because when you get on the bus, when you hit Germantown, you have to pay an extra 28 cents to get into Germantown.
I didn't know that.
Oh,
That's
shit.
terrible.
You have to pay 28 cents, not 25 cents, 28 cents just to go through that. It's a mile. It goes from Ridgeway over to Kirby. Oh, you got a quarter? I'm sorry. You got to get out. That's honest to God. You have to do it both ways, too. If you get out and then you get back on, and at Hobby Lobby there, you have to pay another 28 cents just to get to Ridgeway. Or walk, I guess. But my vision includes mini grids with solar power and MLGW no longer being a power generator, but a power broker. And like applying that, if you can make extra money and put it back into a microgrid and have that money deducted from like your property taxes or some other incentive like that, you should be able to generate money off of your rooftop while it's just sitting there.
There is actually a lot of really intelligent people.
By the way, that happens that's what they're putting in Puerto Rico, and it's especially important because it's a disaster resistant.
Why must we pay for energy?
Yeah, we live next to the river, which is kind of curious as to why we don't have hydroelectric power too, which is...
What if I could just generate my own energy from my house and
Here's a messed up thing on that point. With my company, I've noted we wanted to go full solar, but our utility company out there is a co-op, which usually co-ops are great. That's great. I love that model. But the problem with it is that they have a monopoly, and they actually told us that we could only have 25 kilowatts of solar power on our property, which basically means it's not worth getting solar power and the utility company won't let us. I mean, that's insane to me.
Exactly,
that is way too much control.
Has that as well, some sort
But
of
no,
requirements.
there are some requirements around it, but here's the thing. We have a municipally owned utility company, which means it is not in the business of making money. So we should really be getting everything at cost.
Yep.
I believe that the MLGW charter says that any overages at the end of the year, fiscal year, are supposed to be given back to the customer. That type situation. So I'm just not really. I have a whole lot to do on that one, but here's what I would love to
Well,
see.
you're talking about generating your own power. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
You can generate your own power and any excess.
And it doesn't have to be solar panels. Why not wind turbine or
It'd
anything?
be difficult to put a wind turbine on your roof.
Is it?
One really important policy thing that I've got to hit here is that there's some really intelligent people in our community currently trying to influence MLG&W to get away from TVA and go to another power company. The original estimate that it would save us between $300 and $400 million. When people ask how to pay for things, that would pay for a lot right there.
Exactly.
That would be the reason that they said that original figure was actually lower than what the actual savings would be because they had very conservative, pessimistic estimates on how much solar and wind, how much cheaper those would get over time, and that we're now seeing that they've dropped even more. TVA only uses, I want to say, again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I want to say it was only like 10% renewable energy or something like that, whereas we can get a lot more renewable energy just across the river from another company.
Yeah, I used to do grant writing for with the TVA, and it is like the worst part of a government bureaucracy mixed with a corporation.
And not to mention, they got a button push away from ruining our water supply.
If they haven't already, I mean, it may already be leaking in there.
Well, I don't know if y'all saw the thing on Vice News. That's where I learned all this. That and Scott Banbury and Sierra Club fighting the good fight on the issue. But they actually drilled the hole into our artesian wells. And all they had to do is push a button, and they would have sucked water through the artesian wells from the coal ash that's on top of the water, above the well, and they would have sucked all that through and ruined our entire water supply. Thank goodness Sierra Club and a lot of other good people fought it in court and stopped it right before it happened.
Well, I think I have a way for us to pay for all this. Weed. Just weed. I'm not talking about legalizing it. I mean, I'm me selling it personally and raising up the money for solar panels.
So, going back to like, where do we see the city?
I'm trying to give you some,
But that's going to happen anyway because the state is huge with nothing but agriculture. So eventually it will happen. I'll never underestimate
our city's ability to.
the people who control money have to make that happen. But anyway, imagine if we just had flying car technology and things of that nature here, the same way that they're investing into overseas. I see us being able to have that. I see hopefully before we get to whatever number you said, 2055 or whatever, that we should have light rail that can get us from here to Nashville in, a shorter time than 3 hours, or just something that technology is here. We have 5G technology. Blue light cameras are operating off of those. The sky cams, whatever we call them, are operating off of that. But then people that live in the city of Memphis have limited access to internet accessibility. Why are we just not making the entire city free internet accessible? No. That type situation.
I'm as bad as everybody else, but do we really want Memphis drivers flying cars? I'm kidding. That's a joke.
So here's the thing.
That's more of a joke. I'm kidding.
Tesla is working on this. The cars would be automated.
Yeah, I love the automation.
That type situation.
Computers do better than humans.
Exactly.
Well,
you getting
Andrew Yang talked about 70% of driving jobs being automated in the next 30 years, something like that. And it's amazing how we have mastered solar power for the parking meters downtown. But it's a genuine mystery how to get it in your house.
Automation affects all industries. It's even affecting legal industry.
And if we're gonna be very cutting edge here, why are we not embracing the learning how to fix and maintain automation and things of that nature, as opposed to the fear mongering that, if we have more self checkouts, that means that it's less people working. Well, I mean,
I stand behind that, damn it. Until they pay taxes on those damn robots.
and maybe that's something that needs to happen, but whatever. At the end of the day,
generate money.
but you have people like me. I just refuse to self checkout because I don't want to be a clerk. So I'm just gonna stand in that line and have somebody wait on me. I go to banks that have strong teller presence and things of that nature because I'm just an old head. I like to go in. I like for someone to say my name. The woman that works at the Kroger on Trust and off of Poplar, I walked in and she was like, "Hey, my friend, I saw you in the newspaper. You're running for mayor," and la da da da. It's just something about that, and that's why I love Memphis, because Memphis is this intimate,
So connected.
Yes, it's an intimate environment where everybody kind of like knows you. I was gonna say they like you, but everybody kind of knows everybody, and
One way or another,
it's just one almost big family.
Yep.
In every family, there's some people you don't like, but we all come together at Thanksgiving, have dinner, and then go our separate ways. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's what the uniqueness about Memphis is that we all come together at some point and create this wonderful place that we call Memphis. And it's just a matter of growing it and growing people and doing better and moving forward.
I was in the middle of nowhere in another state, and I had a guy tell me, "Go Tigers," when he saw my hat, and I stopped and had to talk to him, and I said, it made me feel really old. I said, Memphis is like 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, and he goes, "Who's Kevin Bacon?" And I was like,
Memphis made, baby. Somebody's always on their way somewhere else from the city. Richard Wright used to live here, the guy who wrote Native Son.
Yeah. Most of the people who I've been campaigning with are tourists.
Hey, that's a good thing, though. We want people coming
here. I
here.
have palm cars all over the country now. People take the palm cars back home with them and everything. I'm like the city ambassador because I'm telling folk where to go get barbecue, where to stay, and things of that nature. And check this though. How like cool is that you as a tourist would come to Memphis and see your mayor out in the streets connecting with you, because that doesn't happen in a lot of places. And just imagine you come to Memphis and the mayor is just out in the streets engaging, because the mayor is the senior statesman of our city. Yeah. And that's all people really want. That's why people go crazy when they see the current mayor in the streets, because they just want to feel, connected to that prestige and that and I think the letdown is that our current administration is not really concerned about connecting with the citizens.
You hit a really good point there, and it's called accessibility. One thing that I think that is so important when you're, especially local government, really state and federal should be the same. To a reasonable extent, but I think accessibility is very important, and that's why people think I'm crazy for doing this, but I put my cell phone number on my website and I put my cell phone number on my mailers. I want to be the councilman that people know they can call when they have a problem, and I've gotten some crazy phone calls, but that's part of what comes with the territory.
To me, if so many people want to kick your ass in the city, maybe you're doing a terrible job.
It depends on who wants to kick your ass, because
That's a good answer.
the other side might be wanting to kick your ass because you're doing a good job.
That's true.
And you're messing up what they put together for years. And that's why there's so many people who are out here in opposition of us, because they have laid this foundation for years, and it's threatening now that we're coming in and compromising the quality of life that they have mastered and have they've enjoyed for so long. Yeah.
Well, times are changing, baby.
They are. They are.
Well, I want to thank John Marek and Michael Wilson for coming.
John Marek is running for
single
city
member
council,
district,
right,
District 5.
City Council, District 5. I'm running for mayor. The greatest city in the world, Memphis, Tennessee.